Okay, so this is A Christmas Carol, and we're going to start chapter 1, Marley's Ghost. Okay, I hope you guys enjoy this. Marley was dead. There is no doubt about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Even Scrooge had signed it. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. And I want to point out to you that that is a simile. Dead as a doornail, right? Because a doornail is not alive. So they're comparing him to the doornail, Marley. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole administrator, his sole friend, his sole mourner. But even Scrooge wasn't sad at Marley's funeral. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the beginning. Marley was dead. If you don't believe that, then nothing wonderful can come of the story I am about to tell. Scrooge never painted over Marley's name. There it stood years afterward above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge. Sometimes they called him Marley. It didn't matter. He'd answer to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at work. He was a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, clutching old sinner. The cold within him froze his old features. It nipped his pointed nose and shriveled his cheek. It stiffened his gait. It made his eyes red and his thin lips blue. A frosty ice was on his head, eyebrows, and wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. No warmth could warm him. No wintry weather could chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. Scrooge was fouler than the foulest weather. This is making me think about what Zion said and comparing him to the Grinch very much. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to ask in happy voices, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars asked him for anything. No children asked the time. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him. When they saw him coming, they tugged their owners into doorways. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat in his counting house. It was bitter outside. He could hear people in the outside court stamping their feet upon the pavement to get warm. Although it was only 3 o'clock, it was already dark. The entire day had been dark and dank. Candles flickered in the windows. The fog was so thick that you couldn't make out the houses across the street. They were mere phantoms. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open. He wanted to keep an eye on his clerk. So guys, based on the pictures and what we've read so far, when do you think this story takes place? Thinking of setting, when do you think this story is taking place? Riley said past. Cash, what do you think? You want to agree, disagree, or add on to what Riley said? She said past.
I agree what I want to agree to what Riley said because I feel like this book was made a very long time ago because there's no colors. It's all black and white.
Right, and we've talked about that before. Usually when black and white photos are used, that shows that something is taking place in the past, right? Any other things? Look at Scrooge in the picture. Look at what he's writing with. Can anybody see?
Feather pen.
A feather pen. Do we write with feather pens anymore?
No, we write with regular pens.
Yeah, we don't write with those feather pens. We have to dip in the ink anymore. So that's something else that tells me that this story is taking place in the past as well. We could write.
Not usually. We use pens with ink inside of them.
Yes, right. So technology has come a little bit further. So what do you guys think about Scrooge so far? What's something that you kind of already can tell about him based on the text and based on the pictures? What do you think, Holliston?
He doesn't like Christmas because he's just inside and not paying attention to anything outside or celebrating since it's Christmas Eve. He's not.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about Christmas.
It's Christmas Eve and he's at work, isn't he? He doesn't care about that necessarily. Oh, and Riley says the clothing looks a little bit in the past as well. Interesting with that. All right, let's keep reading. Scrooge had a small fire, but the clerk's fire was much smaller. So the clerk would be someone who would work for him, okay? It was so much smaller that it was almost out. The clerk couldn't replenish his fire because Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. What choice did the clerk have but to put on his white comforter and try to warm himself with a candle? "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "You don't mean that, Uncle," said his nephew. "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come, then," said the nephew happily. "What right do you have to be so dismal? You're rich enough." Scrooge had the only answer he could think of. "Bah, humbug." "Don't be angry, Uncle. What else can I be when I live in a world of fools? Merry Christmas. What's Christmas to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, a time for balancing the books. If I had my way, everyone who wished a Merry Christmas would be boiled in his or her own pudding. Then he'd be buried with a stake of holly through his heart." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," Scrooge shot back, "keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. What good has Christmas ever done you?" "Keep it," repeated Scrooge's nephew, "but you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then," said Scrooge. "Christmas is a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of all year when men and women open their hearts freely and help those below them. Although it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good. It will do me good. I say, God bless it." The clerk applauded. When he sensed Scrooge's disgust, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Scrooge glared at the clerk. "Let me hear one more word from you, and you'll lose your job forever." He turned toward his nephew. "You are quite a powerful speaker. I wonder why you don't go into Parliament. That's like government." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow," the nephew pleaded. Scrooge refused. "But why, Uncle?" "Why did you get married?" asked Scrooge. "Because I fell in love," answered his nephew. "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if that were even more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Uncle, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" the nephew asked. "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you," said the nephew. "I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I am sorry with all my heart to find you so stubborn. We have never had a fight, but I have made this yearly journey in honor of Christmas. I'll keep my Christmas humor to the end. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "And Happy New Year," said the nephew. His nephew left the room without an angry word. He stopped to wish good tidings to the clerk. Despite how cold the clerk was, he was much warmer than Scrooge, and returned the glad tidings. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard the clerk. "My clerk with 15 shillings a week, a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas? Ha!" This clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, let 2 people in. They were chubby gents who stood with hats off. They carried books and papers and bowed to Scrooge. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the men, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years," replied Scrooge. 7 years this very night. "We have no doubt his kindness is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman. He presented his credentials. Marley and Scrooge had been two kindred spirits. At the ominous word, kindness, Scrooge frowned. He shook his head and handed the credentials back. At this festive time of year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman holding a pen, it's desirable to help the poor who suffer greatly. Many thousands are in need of common comfort, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the man, laying down the pen. And workhouses? They are still here, said the man. I wish I could say they weren't. A few of us are raising funds to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time since glad tidings abound. How much shall I put you down for? Asked the second man. Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to remain anonymous? The man asked. I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. I don't make merry myself at Christmas. I can't afford to make others merry. I support the workhouses and prisons. They cost enough. Let them go there. Many can't go there. Most won't go. Many would rather die than go to such places. If they rather die, let them, said Scrooge. They had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Seeing clearly that Scrooge was not a generous man, the men left. Scrooge was happy to see them off. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. Even the ancient church bell that peeped slyly down at Scrooge became invisible. The cold became intense. In the corner of the court, laborers repaired gas pipes. They lit a great fire where ragged men and boys gathered to keep warm. All were merry as they passed and jostled on the streets. Some sang songs to those who walked by. One young lad stopped at Scrooge's keyhole to sing him a carol. God rest you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay. At the first note, Scrooge grabbed his ruler with such force that the singer fled in terror. Finally, the hour came to shut the counting house. With ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and snuffed out his candle. He glared at the clerk and put on his hat. I suppose you'll want a day off tomorrow. If convenient, sir, Mr. Cratchit replied. It's not convenient, said Scrooge. It's not fair to pay a day's wage for no work. It's only once a year, sir, said the clerk. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Scrooge buttoned his coat up to his chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day off. Be here all the earlier the next morning. The clerk promised he would, as Scrooge walked away with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling. The clerk, with his comforter dangling below his waist, went on his way. He stopped in the middle of a group of boys. In honor of it being Christmas Eve, he slid down a slide 20 times. He then ran home all the while, wishing glad tidings to everyone he met. Okay, so we're going to stop there for today, okay? If you want to finish chapter 1, you can feel free to do so on your own, okay? But we will finish that tomorrow, and we will also go into chapter 2, okay? All right, so let me talk a little bit about your assignment on the classroom. You're going to go to classwork. And you're going to find where it says a Christmas Carol reading response questions. Okay? A Christmas Carol reading response questions. When you open them up, this is what it should look like. Uh-oh, I think Miss Krask took my questions and changed her name. That's okay. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. It's supposed to say Miss Walker's class. I think Miss Krask changed that, but that's okay. And I found a picture of Scrooge. That's from A Muppet's Christmas Carol, where he says "Bah humbug." So we're going to work just on chapter 1, okay? And the main.
There's for me it says that it is Miss Walker's class.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good then. That's perfect. It doesn't matter as long as you have, it should all still be the same questions. Okay, so under chapter 1, Marley's Ghost, you're going to look at this first question here. What character trait would you use to describe Scrooge? So you're going to think about how you would describe him based on what you know about him. And it's important that you support your answer with evidence from the text. So that's another reason why you're going to want to go back to Get Epic and look at the text, okay? All right, we have not gotten to this point yet, so you do not have to answer this next slide. Today, you only have to answer this slide number 3. Okay, so think about the best trait that you would use to describe Scrooge, okay? And then find some text evidence to support that. Things he says, things he does that would support why you describe him that way. Okay? Okay, does anyone have any questions? Cole, did you have a question?